Hello, everyone. Today is Wednesday, September 1st, 2021, and this is the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group. Our presenter today is Beverly. How do you say your last name? Is it Voth?
Both.
Voth. Sorry about that. Beverly Voth. And she'll be presenting her new JSON parsing tool and showing us some of the new features and the new syntax for parsing JSON in FileMaker. Beverly, please take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I was playing with the actual functions for JSON and wanted to figure out, what did that mean, the key or index or path. So my journey started with, of course, JSON itself and, what that meant. And when you look at all of this, you have to read it about 20 times and you finally go, well, it sort of makes sense. And so again, I was trying to look at that JSON set element that we have. And when it says key or index or path, that's where there were a lot of documentation I could see, but this was not defined quite as well. So I had a lot of people say, I don't understand it either. Here's all the different functions that they all use that key or index or path, except for the actual format elements. And that's what makes it nice and pretty. And I'm going to talk about the new stuff, which I have a better screen of that in a minute. Because they have the bracket notation now. Previously, you only could use the dot notation, but with version 19.3.1, we have a bracket notation, and it fixes that terrible, terrible thing we had where there was a dot in the key name. The W3 schools was always good for JSON, and in the file I have links to these. A couple other things. JSON path is another way with the web viewer. FileMaker Hacks had a thing on JSONata, another way to kind of query. So I'm going to hide that. Okay, so I started with a database, and it was even a little more simple than this. And I just basically had a path that I created and a field that had the JSON I pasted in there. And then I had that calculation, which just was the JSON get element to see what happened. And after a while, I said, this is the pits. I need something a little more where I can format as I go along. So I created this one, and it basically has different sets of documents that I have, and as I go through them, I'll review what they are. If I already did the processing, I have a little checkbox. And again, those resources I just showed you are there. I don't have any plugins or custom functions or web viewer running in this right now, but um, it'll help you understand the actual path that you need. So let's get started. Put my JSON in there. It's 1, 2, 3. This is a unordered list for objects. But when I actually process, it'll reformat them in the order that is what they call unordered. It's really alphabetical. And so what I did was I created this little path, related path. And as I go through the objects, it gives me the values. And I do that through the calcs. And I use each one of these calcs, JSON set element, the JSON list keys, and the JSON list values. So when it gets down to the very end and it has a value, it just shows me the value with that JSON get element. But when I started processing, it took my original, nicely formatted for me, and then processed it down into a really compact version. It doesn't care that you did the pretty format or not. And you can see that the keys match the list values. So it was pretty easy as I was going through to just click on that and it gives me the value. Click on that, it gives me the value. Okay. So then I got into arrays and I said, I don't want them to be reordered. So I did something which was what we call an array of objects. It starts out as an array, but each of the objects inside it are separated so that it stays in order of 1, 2, 3. Show you that too. As it calculated it, kept it in order, gave me the number of keys, gave me the list values. And the first, because it's an array, starts with 0. And arrays in JSON are a 0 index. So to get to the first value that I want, I have to have the path, which is the array index 0 dot 1, which is the element name. And it actually gives me the value I want. There's the JSON again. Same way with the next element. And I have to go to the second, which is index 1 of the array, to get the value I want. So the path to get that actual value is the square brackets, the index, the dot, and then the object name. In here, that's index of 1, which is the second object, and the object name to actually give me that value. Okay. And I'm going to start from scratch on this one to show you exactly how it happens. I have a little toggle that toggles between bracket and dot. If you try this in like FileMaker 17 or 18, it only allows you to do dot notation, but you can totally open this in 17 or 18. Okay, so this is not formatted. I'll show you what happens when I do. It reordered, and even though it's an unordered list, it reordered alphabetically the elements. But it doesn't care whether you format it or not. So let's get started. So I said, okay, I want to get started. I want to set up the path. My first element is contact. It automatically gave me the elements within it. And I could bring it across whatever I wanted. And that's great. So again, my calcs, the final had a value. This one had a value. But I want to show you this. When I got to this and I said, give me the contact element, it listed all the keys, listed all the values, and they're in the correct matching. There's the same number of keys and same number of values, which is great. But I'm going to show you a little trick later why you can't necessarily count on that. You can count on the keys. If it's an array, it'll list them the index. If it's an element object, it'll list the key name. So again, back here, the calcs just kind of cleaned it up, compacted it, so there's one element. Okay, then I did emoji tests to see what happens with emojis. And I'm not gonna show you the details, but you can put an emoji inside of an object name. This one has an emoji that is an object name itself, and it's going to reorder it. I started out with 1 emoji 3, and because it's inside of an object, it reordered it alphabetically. You got to kind of watch that. And then I tried an emoji just as a value, and it worked. And you can also use Unicode for your emojis. So I'm going to format it and show you. So when it processes, it'll change that emoji from the Unicode into the graphical of that. So I thought was pretty cool. Okay, so errors. The JSON format elements, the JSON, all of the JSON functions will do something if you have an error. And so I know this was a bad thing. When I started it, begin the path, says I think you got an error. let me try me, and I even include a little try me button, which didn't help much. But if I look back at the calc, it just repeated that same error. But if I had taken this and said format before I actually did the processing, it would tell me I had an error, so I didn't even need to go on. Here's another error test. And before I go on, I'm just going to do the format elements. And it says I got an error. Don't go on. And I didn't know why that error showed up. Duplicate key testing. So it has an object with an object inside of it and two parts of that object with the same name, so it didn't work. So I changed that up a little bit and put those inside an array, and they are allowed to have the same element name, same object name, because again, it's your objects within an array. And this is kind of an important thing to sort of think about, because when you get to the actual JSON used for data API or the execute FileMaker data API, there's a lot of nesting, and they use that feature of being able to do an array with objects nested inside it. Okay, dots and a keying. I'm going to do this one in dot notation and show you. Begin. And it seems to be okay. It seems to say I've got the object. It seems to say that I've got a value. And I look at my calcs. Looks pretty. My list keys great. My list values is great. But when I try to bring this across, I don't actually get a value. It's totally empty. So it didn't like that it had dots in that element name. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to switch to dot notation. Bring it across again. Ta-da! I have a value. And this is what the dot notation looks like. It has a square bracket just like the arrays. And then the object name itself is within a single quote. So that allows it to pass on through. And that's for reading the element, creating the element. When we actually want to write on an element, an object that has dots in it, you're certainly welcome to, if you can use that bracket notation. Here's another one that I just did. My other key, since you're bringing values across, because I used the bracket notation. And I gave myself little clues along the way of what I was using. I started out with bracket notation. And I look at the keys. They're just fine. And this is all done with the functions and scripting. There's again, nothing else. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to dot, which we don't care what it starts out with. But I wanted to show you that you can kind of mix your brackets and your not brackets. You only need the bracket notation if you are using a dot inside of the object name. And here's the expanded view of that web page, showing you what that is. So I started out with nothing in the start of the path. Start with an empty path. Just give me everything. It says it has a key with an array, and it has the values. And so when I get to the array, here are my keys for that array. There are 3 of them, 0, 1, 2. To get the path to the 0 element. Better. The path to the sort gets me the correct values. I want to test for the not dotted, and I get the value not. And I test for the dotted, which is in the bracket notation again, and I get the value correct. Go back to the top of that array. So the path to get to that is array is the object, and the index of that array is 1. And again, the next object is not bracket, gives me my value of 1. And whoops, I got one with a dot in it, so I had to change it to bracket notation to get the value. And that was just a value at the very end that had that when you look at the JSON. So it's dot test, bracket dot test, and those I had to use the bracket notation. And I just basically wanted to show you that you could mix. So in here, I've got a little thing that toggles between. Here's what the elements or indexes are, or objects are indexed. And here's what the full path was to get to that. So I thought that was pretty cool that you could mix them a little bit. Okay, and then another thing I want to test.
Question here. So can you
Sure.
go back to that?
Sure.
So the dot test.
Yeah, the object name.
I see what you're saying on here. I was confused about the with the array 0 and the array 1. I thought you were saying where it said dot test. I thought you were saying that was the dot notation. I'm like, that looks like the bracket notation to me. But the not dotted is using
just the object. Yeah, just the regular standard
dot notation.
And you could test.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you could do all bracket notation if you want. It doesn't care. If you wanted to just use the bracket notation on those particular objects, you could say, "Is this object have a dot in it?" Yeah. Well,
yeah. The array 0 not dotted, that's the dot notation, and then the array
Correct.
dot test is the bracket notation.
Correct.
Yeah, I was getting confused about what you were saying, and I was like, looking at it, I was like, wait, it says dot there, but that's a bracket notation. There's a dot in the name. Yes, I see. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Totally. No problem. Totally had me go back. Okay. Testing for returns. So this is pretty simple. I have one object. Put a little Pilcrow in there, which also passed. But my text within quotes has an actual carriage return I can see. And I wanted to say, what happens? So I put a little trap in there, ccalcs, for a reason. Because the number of list keys and the number of list values is not the same. And that's because there is an actual return in the value. So your list keys use as a return to limited list, but you can't use that count to bring your values over. In other words, you can't say, give me get value 1, because it would fail. It wouldn't be right. I'll show you a little more of that. This one is exactly the same as this one. I just didn't process it. It just formatted it for me. So if I take this and say JSON format, it changes that carriage return into that /R. Again, it doesn't care. Just does it. Okay, so I said, what if I've got 2 lines in let's try that. Go back here. Calcs. 2 lines. And again, my list keys does not equal my list values. So I can't use that get value. I had to do some processing otherwise. And again, the paths tell me 1 gets me where I want. 2 gets me what I want. I'm great, fine, happy. Okay, I didn't talk much.
Can you go back again?
Yeah.
Look at that for the list keys, list values.
On this one?
The testing for returns.
The first one?
Yeah, or on both of these, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
So when we're looking at the list keys, list values.
Yes, I'll go back to that. Okay.
So here the list keys are 1 and 2.
Correct.
Right? So that's working
properly. Because in the JSON, we only had 2 objects.
Yep.
Okay.
And when we say the list values, that looks like that is working
correctly. Oh, it's working,
right?
But you cannot rely on saying, oh, I've got my list. Now I'm going to get the values by using the get value function itself. You have to stay within.
I see.
you have to stay within JSON. I think, and that's where some people made the mistake of trying to say, well, my keys are going to tell me exactly what my value is with that little pretty \r in there, but it doesn't.
Oh yeah,
It
so what
gives
you're
you the
saying.
actual value with a
Mhm.
character return.
Yeah, so you're saying if you tried to do get value on your keys and get the first value,
That's
you
good.
would get 1 as your first value.
Correct.
And if you tried to do get value on your JSON list values, you'd get line
Just
1 only because
correct.
of the return character in there.
Correct.
So what you're saying is you should always get the actual value of the
Right.
key because you would get the full line 1, line 2
Right.
uh, back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the JSON get element on that path, which is 1,
Hmm.
it does return what I wanted.
Hmm.
So it didn't. It saved it. Translated it to that \r, but when it returned, when I got to the final, it saved it exactly as I needed it.
Great.
It was just within that first process. If you're trying to do something, so well, I'm going to loop through all my keys and then get all my values. Well, you got
Yeah,
to be
you're not going to
careful.
get the right thing there. Yep.
Oh yeah, you got to be careful. Okay. And that was the same way on the first one. It only had 1,
Yep.
but that really shows it where I did 2 of them.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
functions are working and are returning what
Oh
is
yeah.
expected.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's just if you're not expecting it.
If you're thinking I can do this with what I got back, no.
Yeah. Always
Okay.
always use the get element. Right? That's the lesson from this. Always use get element.
Oh yeah. JSON get element always. Yeah. Okay. So arrays, we use some nested arrays and kind of complex arrays, but really they are a comma separated and they are in order. So the element or the object comment has an array of 1, 2, 3. They stay 1, 2, 3. Same way with numbers, not quoted 1, 2, 3. And I didn't process those. Okay. So I had a test where I started just a snippet of something, and I said, what if I start with the brackets, that it's an array snippet? And some of the other tools that I tested, it failed on me. So this is kind of really basically why I created all this, because things weren't working when I tried everybody else's stuff. So I started with empty path. Then my path was, because I'm inside an array, the first object is at index 0 in that array, returns me all of what's in there. And then when I get the next set of the path, which is the test itself, test object, it returns what's inside there, which is that unordered list, which again, it changed it up on me so that 1, 2, and 3 are out of order as I put them in there. And on this one, I actually switched to bracket notation midway. So for my second object in that array, index 1, I used all bracket notation. So the path to get to the test is index 1, the bracket notation, test object, and it returns me again what's within that unordered list. 4, 5, 6, kind of rearranged for me. So little gotchas. I tried this actually in 17, because I think that was as far back as it would go, and it's the same set of data, but I had a problem with it. It wouldn't let me start with an array. So when I did my path, I had to actually start with a dot in that path in order to read it, which is great. So then the next one is the index 0 test element or test object. And because it has another object inside of it, It's dot index 0 dot object name test object name 1. Same with 2 and 3. And I can't do bracket notation in 17, so it was just the standard path. So that's an actual path to get me that value 6. I had to start out with a dot. And I didn't really test, but I think you can use a dot always at the beginning. When you read the documentation, it says optional, but it doesn't hurt to do that. Here's another one kind of emphasizing that if you got a really complex JSON, which starts out with an object and has an array and some objects inside it with another array, and I just brought over a few things. So my comment object has an index with 3 things in there. Let's switch to the bracket or the full path. And it reordered them, except for comment is part of the array, so it came across. Comment 2 is part of the array, index 1, it came across. But it got to this, and it has an object inside of as part of that actual array. So it decided to reorder things for me when I got to the final. A comes before comment 3 within that part because it's that unordered but reordered. So another kind of gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to do one which has some mixed objects and arrays to see if it helps. So if you look at it as it formatted, name, wife, and kids are all in the same level as objects. So if it starts out as an object, what do you think it's going to do? Yep, it's going to reorder them. So it's going to say kids, name, and wife when I actually do it. So let's try that. And I want to bring across just Bob. And I want the wife, but she's inside there. And I want the kids. And there's actually 2 of them, so there's an index. I don't know if you saw that. There's a little clue. I put a little clue in there that this is an array that I'm looking at. So I know in part of my path, this is an array index and not an object key name. I'm going to bring across Sarah. The other kid, which is Ethan. And look, yep, there it did it. Kids comes for Bob, for Lisa. So that mixture of ordered and unordered is, you kind of have to think about what you're getting and where you're getting it as you do it. And I did it again just for you in bracket notation. So it's the same thing, that it just used totally bracket notation for getting the same values. Okay. The execute FileMaker data API and the data API for REST returns you something that's really nested. So you have to be careful. It starts out with messages, object, and has an array inside that tells you whether it's okay or not okay. And then your response is actually the data that comes back. So it says, here's my data. I've got some rows. Here's my row. I have another row down here. That's your record. And then it has all of the fields within it. And it does something really cool. It actually took any quotes within the field and escaped them for me. Any returns or tabs within a field and escaped them for me. This one doesn't happen to have any portals in that particular record, so it just returns me that curly braces. And it also, as a part of the record, you get the mod ID and record ID. And at the very end of that response, it gives me the data info on what I got back, the database, the found count, the layout, return count table, and total record count. This one happens to have a portal. So when it gets to portal data, again, it's more that really complex with an array of objects. But once you get the path to something, back here, once you get the path to the response that was for the first record or index 0, it's going to be the same pattern for the second record or the fourth record, which is index 3. So if you're looping through this and you know what that pattern is, you don't need to repeat that request. Just do it as a loop and change your index. And a couple other examples that I did. Why you might want to use some of the other utilities is this is an example that I got. It looks like it might have been something used for a chart, and it just gives me the information that I need for that. But what if I didn't want to necessarily import that into the database? I just wanted to use it for charting data, and then, oh, by the way, I want to know what the total dollars are for this year or the total sales for this year. And so there are other utilities that allow you through the web viewer and some of the other query languages to allow you to actually total those up and give you back the results of just this set of data, which is pretty cool. Okay, again, that list values is going to ignore when there is. It reordered it for me, which I expected. The word sea or the ocean doesn't have any value in it, and I expect that, so it looks great. And in the calc, it returned me nothing, which is great. And this value was great. Got what I wanted, but I wanted to show you again, it put it in the same order, and it just happens to have the same number of return values in the list values, even though one is empty. So I thought that was pretty cool that it was going to actually return me that list of values and show me an empty. And then I got into, what if I've got zeros as an object name and I format it? Says, no, can't do it. But that, I said, well, what if somebody comes along and says, let's quote that number and make our object name 0. And I said, well, yeah, that's okay. It works just fine. You get your values back, but it's confusing because you've got the index that you're always working with. So you have to be pretty aware, and that's why I kind of put some little clues in there along the way that I'm using an object to get all these values. And it's not an array. I mean, if I look at an array, it would give me that value. But these happen to be objects. I did the same thing as bracket notation, which I think made a little more sense to me, saying I know it's not an index to an array because it's returned it to me just like I needed it, being in the square brackets. And then I kind of mixed it up where I put some inside it. I started with an array, got an object with those numbers as the object name, and I mixed it up when I got the second set. So index 0, object name 0, object name 1, object name 2, object name 3, and I get the right results. And I changed it up to do the bracket notation. Again, it was array index 0. So the full path to get to that is the bracket notation. And I get the values just fine. So I kind of leave it up to everybody to sort of think about if you're going to use numbers as objects, what you want to use, why you want to use it. And we don't have a choice sometimes of what we get back. But be very, very careful if you're looking through that list of key values, whether what you're getting back is an object or an array index, even if it's a number. I said, okay, we also have Booleans, which I didn't show you before. The word true in quotes is just text. It's an object name. But the word true without quotes is a Boolean. And when you do the JSON get element, it returns it as the number 1. On false, it returns as 0. Again, the true returns as 1. False is in 0. So you need to think about that as you're getting stuff back. If you're looking for the word true, it's not going to happen. I say, okay, let's try the null test. Again, the word null in quotes is just a value. It's a text value. But the word null without the quotes is an object that means nothing. FileMaker doesn't have nothing null. It has empty. But let's see what happens in our calcs. Okay. Oh, whoops. Not only did it not give me anything, it didn't give me anything. So it didn't actually preserve that null. It moved up the list to say, well, this is what you got back, because one of them was null. So kind of keep that in mind. Okay. I'm going to do another little trick with this. This is back to our family with Bob, Lisa, Sarah, and Ethan. And I put a little comment in there, this one to make it so I would note that I put a script in there that I'm called update with path. Because what I'm going to do once I create those paths, I can also use it for the JSON set element and the JSON delete element. Pretty cool. So let's do that. Okay. Same thing. Begin. The keys. And I just want the kids for this demo. I'm going to bring out Sarah's age, color, favorite color, name, and let's bring Ethan over. Let's get his name. Okay, so that's just the values that returned in the calcs. It shows you we've got what we needed. And there's the full path to get to that. I said, okay, well, Sarah's 12, which means she's almost a teenager. So let's use our little trick to change her name. She says, I don't want to be called Sarah anymore. Use my middle name. So I'm on this path in the JSON, and here she is, that first index element with the name object, and here's her value. But let's do a little trick here. I want to update with path. Okay, so the current value is Sarah. What's the new value? It says, oh, I want to use Betty. And I said update, and boom, it did it. I'll format it to show you that Sarah's name is now Betty, and it brings the correct value in the calc. And just because of the way I created this, we still have our legacy data in there. So if I look at this, it's purple, which is great. I go back up to the array. It didn't change that. It's something I set along the way as a part of a path. So if you wanted to really, make this dynamic, you go back and recalculate all those. But I said the point was to try to show you that it actually can update. Okay, and Betty's pretty fickle. She doesn't necessarily like purple all the time, so let's kind of change that. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm not going to put a value in there. I just want to clear out the whole thing. Say update. So I put a little warning. Do you want to clear it or delete it? And I want to clear it, which boom, it works. She no longer has a color and it's just an empty value. And, again, Betty's 12. So she says, I don't really have a brother. So let's take this path and let's use the JSON delete element. Sure you want to change it? And you say, okay. And I'm going to do nothing. But I'm not going to delete it at this point, which works. Or I'm not going to clear it at this point, which works. But I'm going to use that JSON delete element. Boom. He no longer exists in the family. There's only one kid. Again, because I saved this along the way, it seems like he's still there. Go back up to kids. In the calcs, he's still there. And that value still came over. But my JSON itself changed using these paths that I've got. That's how I could change. So I could change Betty, Sarah to Betty, get rid of her color, and get rid of her brother all at once, which I thought was pretty cool. So knowing that path is really important in all of these. And then I put up some kind of conclusions. A little bit bigger to read there. Okay. So to recap, objects are unordered lists with the key, name, and value pairs. Always has the curly braces around it. There's more than one. It's comma separated list. Arrays are an ordered list of values, and it uses the zero as an index to start, and it always has the square brackets around it. And again, if you want more than one value within the array, it has a comma separated list. But both of those contain other objects or other arrays as values, so it gets pretty complex. The JSON format elements can catch errors, but you don't have to do it every step along the way. I only did it to show you what it looked like when it made a change. But if you do it the first time around, it'll catch your errors if you have any. And after that, it doesn't care. It just kind of compacts it anyway. Emojis work perfectly valid, but if you're going to have it as an object name, it's going to resort. Dots and key object names are fixed with the 19.3.1, and I'm using .2, the latest, with the bracket notation. And I showed you could mix that dot and bracket notation, which I thought was also pretty cool. The returns within values have the gotchas. It'll convert it for you, but don't use that get value at all. The dot at the start of the path was necessary, I think, and again, in earlier versions when I tried different things. And it doesn't hurt to have it. So JSON list values doesn't ignore the empty values, but cannot be read as is with the get value. It's just you're going to fail if you try. So if the number of keys does not match the number of values with that JSON list keys and JSON list values, then there could be returns in the values, there could be nulls in the value, any number of things that just are going to throw it off. So think about that. The data API REST and the execute data, FileMaker data API escapes the JSON for you, which I thought was pretty cool. You do the tabs, returns, quotes, and it can come back as pretty complex. But once you get that pattern, especially if your first field or your first record and your portal data, it'll tell you what it is, and you just know you can repeat it as you need it. The Booleans true and false always evaluate to the numerical 1 and 0 with the JSON get element. And yes, I encourage you to test beyond this. We definitely just wanted to find out what that key or index or path is and how to use it with the JSON functions. So my test all succeeded so far. I haven't had anybody come up with any that didn't work. But I'm going to go ahead and post this if somebody wants it and to test it. So I'll take questions if you want.
I think this is a pretty cool kind of JSON practicing tool for people who are unfamiliar with the syntax or want to do some experimenting to learn more about what they're going to be getting back. This seems like a great way to get really comfortable with all the different JSON functions. So
I had a lot of people tell me that they stopped at this point because they didn't understand what that key or index or path was. They said, well, I'm going to have somebody else do it because I just don't get it. And I thought I knew what it was because I work with XPath in XML, and it's similar. But again, let's go back to that, how complex it can be. It's pretty complex, but if you're not kind of thinking about these things along the way, and that's kind of what I did with this database, is to help people understand that there's nested and there's not nested, and a 0 could be an object name, or a 0 is that index, so you got to be careful, and the other gotchas that I put in there. But so cool.
Well, great. Thank you very much for sharing this. This will be a cool resource for learning. And if people are interested in taking the FileMaker certification test, I'm sure there are questions about that on there, particularly with the new bracket syntax, because they're always going to be testing the newest features in FileMaker.
Yeah.
So this is a good practice, practice utility. And learning how to get data out of JSON is really important, I think, for a FileMaker developer in general, particularly if you're trying to work with any APIs. So it's really valuable to be comfortable with this syntax and how to get the specific element that you're trying to get the value of. So this can be a great tool for everybody to learn that.
And I actually used a lot of scripting to get things, and so to get my calcs all figured out and to actually do the keys that I needed, all of this stuff, and the navigation. And I think also that was part of the learning is once you get something and you figure out that it's an object and not an array, and as I brought it across to just store it, it's really kind of that same thinking where you're looping through whatever those values were within that calc, within that list keys. I just looped through those to get that set created. So and again, watching that gotcha just doesn't work as the get value.
Yeah, I think JSON list values has some value for getting everything that's in there if you know what the data set is supposed to be, and if you know what you're going to be doing with it very specifically, and you have a very good use case for it.
Oh yeah.
But I think generally the best practice is not to get your keys and then get value. I think you need to get your keys and then get the element of the specific key to make sure that you always get exactly the value that you're looking for, rather than trying to match it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are use cases for list values still, like if you can't use the keys for some reason.
Okay. So how many people did we have?
Cool. Just a couple of us in here, but we will have the recording up online, and we always get a lot more people watching it. Once it gets posted online.
I had invited someone and they didn't make it, so they'll be watching the recording.
I did this at FM Disk, but there were several people that said they couldn't make that meeting because of the time of day, and so I said, well, I'll do it again, and maybe it'll get a different set of people that missed that one too. Very good.
Great. Well, thank you very much for presenting. Round of applause.
Yay.
Always happy to have
Yes.
everyone coming in here and sharing all the cool things that they're doing with FileMaker. And whenever people learn something new and exciting, it's really great to have that shared with the community.
Yeah.
And this tool that you've built seems like it's a good learning tool. And that's great that you'll be sharing that with everyone.
Yeah, I pretty much came up with a theory that I do this kind of thing because I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know the answer to the question, what does this mean? And so I come up with something and write an article about it or create a database, and I get my answer.
Great. Well, I think that's it. It's about 8 o'clock, so right on time.
All right.
Thank you very much for sharing this. Reminder
right.
to everyone, our meetings are the first Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Everyone is welcome. We're technically the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group, but we're all remote right now. Hopefully one day we'll be back in. But for now, even when we are back in, we'll still be streaming it all online.
Yeah.
Everyone is always welcome. If you want to invite anyone, please do. If you have anything that you'd like to share with the group or you want to present on something, please let me know. My email is david@bluefeathergroup.com, and we would love to have you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good evening.
Take care.